Perhaps when everything was finished, she could ask Jinchi about giving him a reward. "What are you looking at anyway?" Maomao asked, peering at the map. Now that she had a good look, she realized it was covered in annotations. These described things like the climate and soil type of each region in considerable detail. I kept notes on this map when I went on my grasshopper slaying journey. I wanted to write down any unique qualities of the fields since I had the chance. But in the end I barely got to half of them. Oh man, this guy is useful. Unfortunately for him, his job in this case was to be used and used again, only to see others steal his best moments. Maomao vowed afresh that she would see him recognized for his contributions this time, if never again. From the map, I take it that you're trying to decide where to grow crops. Didn't you do that already? This time it's more concrete. The powers that be want to know what crops can be grown where. We can't continue sending food from the central region forever, can we? I'm trying to figure out what we can grow quickly with an eye toward crops that can be stockpiled. What about your potatoes? I can't give them anything that I don't know for certain will grow. The next several years will be an experiment. Apparently he didn't intend to imitate his father. What about ordinary wheat? We could clear out the fields that didn't get harvested and replant right away. Oh, we are going to grow wheat. Only in the fields where it was initially planned, though. Planting wheat in the same field year after year reduces the harvest. Oops, right, Maomao nodded. What's all this about fields and harvests? The quack said. He was failing to follow the conversation as usual, but anyway he was there. Beans might be feasible, but the harvest for those is late. There might not be much we can do about that. Lahan's brother seemed to have an almanac in his head. The real problem is seeds. You mean like regular seeds? Yes, when you have nothing to eat you don't have the margin to leave seeds for next year either. And then you are finished, right? I used some of my supply on the bean sprouts. There is still some leeway with the burr clover, but when it comes to soy or mung beans, we cannot have people pulling them up by the roots. That was a fair point. If people pulled out the very things the beans grew from, there would be nothing left. So I am trying to think of something we can harvest, and harvest fast, alongside fields that will let us grow wheat. It was startling to realize that this man's thinking would revolutionize the local agriculture, and he wasn't intimidated by the scale of the project. Lahan's brother wasn't looking for Maomao and the quack's input so much, as he seemed to be getting his thoughts in order by talking aloud to them. Sometimes when a person asked for advice, they weren't actually looking for a solution. The thing is, I need to keep yield, population and soil quality in mind all at the same time. I was never much for calculating. If Lahan were here he'd have it done in a second, Maomao said. Don't you mention Tousle glasses to me. Lahan's brother snapped. His annoyance was understandable. Unlike his adaptable, politically astute younger brother, he'd had to live with the short straw all his life. He is your younger brother, isn't he? Maomao asked. He's your older brother, isn't he? Lahan's brother shot back. Things seemed likely to devolve from here, so Maomao stayed quiet and pretended the whole episode hadn't happened. Speaking of him, there haven't been any letters from him, Lahan's brother said. Really? From Lahan, you mean? I got one just the other day, not me. I've only gotten letters from my father. Lahan loves writing letters. I was expecting to get more from him. If Lahan had bothered to write to Maomao, it seemed strange that he wouldn't write to Lahan's brother. Incidentally, the quack seemed to be gradually realizing that Lahan's brother wasn't Lahan's, but Lahan's older brother. He still didn't ask his name. Maomao paused thoughtfully. What is it? Lahan's brother asked. Nothing, she said. She was simply thinking about the letter she'd gotten a few days earlier. She had dismissed it without much thought then, but now she stood up. I'll be right back. HRM, oh sure. Maomao went up to her room where she found a small vase of flowers. She de-stripped the place of anything too girlish, but the quack occasionally left little decorations like this. Here, Maomao said, returning with the box in which she kept her letters. What's this? The letter I got from Lahan. Huh. Doesn't this paper look oddly nice to you? I initially assumed it was to help it survive a long journey. Maomao stared at Lahan's letter. The regular writing paper was reinforced with a backing of oil paper. Yao's and Enen's letters, which had come at the same time, had been constructed the same way. Hey, what's this sentence mean? Lahan's brother asked, giving the line Yao and Enen are at my house yet. What do you suppose I should do? Very close scrutiny. Oh, you know, Maomao said, giving him a brief rundown on Yao and Enen's situation. Just imagine what Lahan's brother's face looked like then. The corners of his eyes were wide and astonished, raised in fury. His nostrils flared and he bared his teeth like a beast. His hair stood on end so violently it seemed to stretch up to heaven. Yeek, the quack cried, shrinking back. Maomao was almost as surprised as he was. She hadn't even known Lahan's brother was capable of looking so angry. If someone had carved his likeness in wood at that moment, it could have passed for a wrathful deity. That bastard. He chases me to a piddling field somewhere while he lives in a mansion with an eligible young woman. 2 eligible young women. With Inen around, Maomao was sure there would be no trysts, assignations, or romantic rendezvous of any kind, but she didn't think trying to explain that to Lahan's brother would help at the moment. He's always been like this, always waltzing in to steal my thunder. The quack doctor was still cowering, so Maomao grabbed the duck as it went by. Lahan's brother buried his face in its feathers. Duck therapy. After a few minutes, Lahan's brother's face was back to normal. The duck, evidently unwilling to work for free, began badgering the quack for some food. With Lahan's brother finally calm, Maomao thought maybe they could get back on track. "Don't you think there's something odd about this writing?" she said. "Oh, how so?" He even sounded different now. For all the La blood in his veins, he was a surprisingly normal person and relatively handsome to boot. But at that moment he looked supremely sullen. If duck therapy wasn't enough, a cat seemed the next best thing. Unfortunately, the little calico furball was far, far away. Again, I would have understood, but yet. That doesn't make sense. Those 2 went home once already. What do you mean they went home once? Is this the second time they've been there? Lahan's brother, please keep your distance when you're making that face. I told you not to say Lahan's name in front of me. Yeah, okay. Lahan's brother appeared to be manfully enraged by his younger brother's relations with the fairer sex. Just suppose, that Yao and Inen had once again sought shelter at Lahan's house because of things with Yao's uncle. Maomao could imagine that. But she was also sure that Lahan, of all people, would never write yet when he meant again. There's something going on here. She studied Lahan's letter. It was stuck firmly to the oil paper backing. There didn't seem to be any way to separate them. No, wait. It looks like somebody tried to peel them apart. Each of the 4 corners of the oil paper looked like they had been peeled at, although the traces were faint. Somebody pulled them apart and then pasted them back together. She examined the other 2 letters. If something had been done to Lahan's missive, it seemed more than likely that the other 2 had been treated the same way. When she looked closely at the text, she could see the characters were a bit blurred. This was probably a product of pasting the oil paper on after the letter had been written, with the glue seeping through to the front. What had happened to the letters? If someone had given Yao and Inen some idea, some little thing to do to their messages, they might all somehow be connected. Maybe I'm supposed to put it over an open flame. No, they were on oil paper. It would burn if exposed to a flame. Perhaps the reason the letters were backed with oil paper was to fool anyone who tried to tamper with them. It would force them to actually look at the letters, and then they would discover there was no sensitive information inside. But that was a bluff. Maomao continued to stare at the letters. Lahan's brother joined her. The quack, not wanting to feel left out, assumed a thoughtful expression. "Are you sure this came from Lahan?" Lahan's brother asked after a moment. "What makes you say that? That is his handwriting. I know it pains you, but try to accept reality." "That's not what I mean. You know how obsessed he is with numbers, right?" "Yes, boy, she certainly did know. But doesn't this letter look ugly to you?" Lahan's brother spread open his younger brother's letter. "I wouldn't say it seems unusual." "No, it is. When he writes a letter, it's always on paper that's 5 lines across and 8 lines down. I never knew that." Maybe it was what Lahan would have referred to as a beautiful ratio. Unfortunately, Maomao didn't have that much interest in Lahan's letters. Maybe he just didn't have enough paper. No. You don't understand how obsessed with numbers he is. Once I gave myself a quick haircut, I just needed it to be shorter, and in the middle of the night he came in and cut it all while I was asleep. If it was uneven by so much as the width of a fingernail, he kept cutting until there was hardly any left. Can you imagine how I felt? He was 5. Okay, so you don't have the world's best younger brother, or family for that matter. That's who we're dealing with. If he gave up his perfectly ordered writing style, there's a reason. Lahan's brother's gaze nearly bored a hole through the letter. Maomao meanwhile turned to the other 2 letters. Yao's was longer than Lahan's, but substantially shorter than Inen's. Maomao had read more than enough of Inen's letter. It was not only sprawling but written in characters the size of grains of rice. Lahan's and Yao's characters were the perfect size, very easy to read. On a whim, Maomao placed Lahan's letter over Yao's. They had the same number of rows. However, Yao's letter had exactly 3 times as many columns. With their characters being about the same size, they could easily be overlapped. If Yao's letter was longer, well, she could get emotional sometimes. Look at this, Maomao said. Look at what? The Verdigris house got more than its share of students who were taking, or who had passed, the civil service exam. They always said that by far the hardest part of the exam was being cooped up in what amounted to a cave for days on end, writing and writing and writing. They had to write in perfectly ordered, balanced characters, just like the copybooks. The columns and rows, said Maomao. It wasn't just the size of the characters. The number of characters running down the page was also identical. She matched up the edges of the two letters, then noted the word in Yao's that corresponded to the yet in Lahan's. Then she slid the letter further along, observing the next word that overlapped with yet. Yao's letter was precisely 3 times longer than Lahan, S. She moved Lahan's letter one more time and observed the final overlap. Find the coal. Coal, yes, it is a rock that burns. It can be used medicinally, but I have heard it can also do a lot of harm. Maomao's father, Liu Men, was well aware that any drug could also be a poison, and he strove to use medicines with as few harmful effects as possible. Therefore, Maomao did not know much about coal. So why are we looking for this coal? I am not sure myself. But I think we should report it. Maomao put the letters back in the box, hoping it was all just a strange coincidence. Chapter 11, The Coal Mine. Miss Maomao. Miss Maomao. What is it, Miss Chu? This kind of exchange had nearly become a routine for them. It was unusual, however, for Chu to show up after a day's work just before Maomao went to bed. What brings you here so late? Maomao asked. Well, I have a little something to tell you about Mr. Lahan's coal code. Maomao had told Jinshi about Lahan's letter, and if Chu was coming to her at this hour, it suggested something had come of the matter. The fact is, not many letters have come from Mr. Lahan for the Moon Prince. I kind of thought not. We estimate that only half his letters have made it here. But even on a long and difficult journey like this one, doesn't it seem strange that so many letters addressed personally to the Moon Prince should accidentally disappear? Someone was deliberately disposing of Lahan's communications. If he was trying to tell them something, it would explain why he'd sent Maomao these riddling letters. It was a backup plan in case he didn't reach Jinshi, the message conveyed in a way that only Maomao and her companions were likely to notice. It was still pretty lucky we spotted it, she said. It sure was. Without you and Lahan's brother putting your heads together, you'd never have figured it out. And imagine if you'd eaten Lahan's letter before you noticed. I'm not going to eat any letters, Maomao said. Sometimes she didn't understand Chu's jokes. Maybe not, but Miss Chu's goats sometimes do. You're still trying to raise those goats, huh? Yes. Thanks to them, I can drink nice, fresh, funny-smelling milk anytime I want. You don't make it sound very appetizing. Every time I see goat meat at dinner, I think maybe your friends finally met the butcher. The mama goat had a baby and gives milk now. The kid is a boy, so he can be the husband of the third goat. As for the daddy goat, he went on a very long trip to a faraway place. They come, they go, but there are always 3 of them. Daddy goat will live forever in Miss Chu's heart and stomach, which all seemed to work out to this one of the goats had been eaten. Maybe that was the animal Tianyu had been practicing his dissection on. Now maybe let's get back on subject. Yes, please, Maomao said. If she entertained all Chu's digressions, it would be morning before long. About that coal, it seems Isay province did mine some, although only a little bit. Oh, indeed, but that was almost 20 years ago. There are no records of any recent mining operations. Still, what an intriguing thought. Let me guess, there are no records left from 20 years ago, Maomao asked. The suppression of the Yi had occurred 17 years before, and during that time much of the era's paper trail had been burned. You are exactly right. Our suspicion is that someone among those suppressed was in charge of the coal mining. Well, that does not help us much then. But there must have been some people who did the actual mining right. Yes, but you know what happens to people after a major conflict like that. Who can say? The mine never yielded that much anyway, so it was abandoned. But in that case or anyway, it would create some very enticing opportunities if people believed that was true, said Chu. Now this was a striking turn in the conversation. Chu went on. Miss Maomao, did you know that Master Jiaku invited Master Jinshi and the old fart strategist to have a little chat? No. And I do not want to know, she said firmly. I gather that Master Jiaku suggested starting a war against another country. You do not much care what I think, do you, Miss Chu? Miss Chu believes information should be shared with the right people. This information, however, was decidedly not something Maomao wanted to hear. It was clear why Chu had come to Maomao's room at night. If the quack doctor heard about this, he would have been very distraught. Now which country do you suppose Master Jyakuo suggested fighting? I can't hear you, Maomao said, pressing her hands to her ears. Chu grinned and tickled her. Hey, no fair. Maomao flopped helplessly onto the bed and Chu jumped on her, pinning her down. So much for plugging her ears. Chu whispered to her, he's not after Hokuaran, it's Sheo he's after. I didn't want to hear that. No, she would have preferred not to know, but now that she knew, she had a question. Why Sheo? I would have thought attacking them would do us more harm than good. Setting aside the fact that attacking other countries is completely stupid to begin with. Good question. One benefit is that if we capture the nearest city, it comes with harbours. We'd have free use of the sea lanes, and that's worth a lot. Importing crops would be much easier. True, perhaps, yet to Maomao it didn't sound like enough. Plus, considering what Sheo did to us last year over the Shrine Maiden, we have a ready excuse. All the more so if the Moon Prince, whom they wronged more than anyone, were to lead us. It might look like a good excuse outwardly, but hadn't there been a lot of behind-the-scenes dealing? If the former Shrine Maiden were willing to provide information, they might indeed gain some extremely useful intelligence on how to attack Sheo. But did Jyakuo know that the Shrine Maiden was still alive? Surely not. One more thing. Everyone is on edge right now, and it makes people prone to violence. If we can point that anger away from our leaders and toward another country, wouldn't that be helpful? Think of all the people who lost their jobs because of the swarm. How many of them have become bandits? Just imagine what the old fart could do with pieces like that to deploy in battle. It was hardly an uncommon reason to start a war, but Maomao was nobody's fool. I thought Sheo was supposed to be a neutral country. If we invade, Miss Chu, won't other nations be mad at us? I should think so. Hokuaran in particular would take it hard. You could argue that if we can seize the harbour in one fell swoop, we might manage things somehow, but we would still have a rough time of it. And it would cost a lot of money. She sprang to her feet. But what if, say, there was a mountain with a coal mine on the western edge of the province? The western edge on the border with Sheo, in other words. Coal doesn't get used a lot in Li, but it's an important fuel resource in places without much timber, Chu said. That's what I've heard. She didn't know firsthand. She'd never used the stuff herself, but a fuel that could be used without needing to make charcoal would certainly have its uses. They say it stinks when you burn it, though, so people do like it as much as charcoal. Liu Hemen had used coal during his studies abroad. Burning it created secondary products that were poisonous but also medicinal. However, if mining the coal was too difficult, there was no point in doing it. The former Empress Regnant had banned logging, but charcoal remained a better and cheaper fuel than coal. Wow, really? What does it smell like? Chu asked. I haven't smelled it myself, but I am told it is acrid. They say if you smell it once, you will always recognize it. I guess the only way to know for sure would be to burn some ourselves. Maomao stayed seated on the bed and watched Chu. Ho, well, suppose there was a great deal of coal that could be extracted from the Sheo side. What if we could import that with our newly obtained sea route? What if Sheo didn't even know there was coal there, or what it was worth? Although, to be fair, I doubt they really don't know what it's worth. That would change the equation, determining whether or not there would be a profit. It could even determine whether or not to go to war. If there was some other way to use coal too, that would change things even more, but let's set that aside. Chu mimed putting an object to one side. Now I understand why Lahan told me to look for it. Maomao was suddenly very tired. Lahan had found out somehow that there was coal in Isei province. He had found and examined records and materials about the province. He looked at whatever was left in the central region and discovered that officially there had been no mining. This is completely different from the over-reporting of the crops. If the visitors from the central region learned about this, it really would be trouble. So have they been mining the coal without informing the government? It would certainly explain how there were enough resources to provide for farmers in times of poor harvest. Moreover, it would be hard to believe that such a thing had been done exclusively on Jyakuo's personal initiative. Maomao broke into a very unpleasant sweat, but Chu looked as cool as could be. Miss Chu, Maomao said. What is it, Miss Maomao? Tell me, all of this is strictly within the realm of speculation, isn't it? Never act on an assumption was Maomao's motto. Now of all time seemed like a moment to heed her old man's advice. Yes, it is. But there's some very compelling evidence, Chu said, dashing Maomao's hopes. Mining is a very dangerous activity, so we believe they initially used many slaves. Weren't the surviving windreaders enslaved? Maomao didn't say anything. Knowing Chu's information network, she might already have talked to some of the former miners. She might also be aware that Jyakuo's mother was herself a former member of the windreader tribe. If your kinfolk were in serious trouble, wouldn't helping them be an excellent justification for almost anything? You'd be a do-gooder on the side of right. It might even explain the destruction of the Yi clan 17 years ago. Maomao barely heard what Chu was saying. Her head was full of a single thought. Miss Chu, aha, does Master Jinchi believe that there's a benefit to be had here? Is he going to war? Chu just smiled and answered her with a question of her own. Do you think he could? Not on his own, it wouldn't be possible. Chu smiled again, and almost as if she could read Maomao's mind, said, It's times of peace and only peace that make the Moon Prince the great man he is. Was that a compliment?